Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started with today's topic, I would just like to briefly go over what to expect. And as far as the webinar itself, this is a recorded webinar, which means it will be available on our AACRAO website later, hopefully this afternoon or evening. If you would like to enable closed captions, please do so at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. We encourage you to interact with us, with the panelists and each other, and you can do so by clicking on the chat, or if you would like to ask specific questions related to our topic today, please do so by clicking on the Q&A button, and you can also ask questions anonymously if you wish. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Noah. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Velma, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody who's sharing their valuable time with us, join us live, or if you're watching the recording, we definitely appreciate you being here with us. We're going to jump pretty quickly into the content, and our panelists agreed to get a little fun with us by saying, rather than reading our bios to you, I will drop a link to their bios. You can just click on their names and they will be there. We're just going to do a quick round robin in which they're all going to share a badge that does not exist but should, so they could earn it. And Simone, we will start with you, and then popcorn over to Carrie, Amrit, and Marty.
Hello, everyone. So the badge that I would like to earn and doesn't exist is the Serendipity Engineer badge.
That's great, Simone. Nice work there. Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Lemoy. I probably have earned my badge, but it's not in my digital wallet because it's actually a signed open badge that I would like from my employer to put in my wallet. So I've earned it, but it doesn't exist yet.
Hi, everyone. I was going to say, my name is Amrit Alawalia. I was going to say I have a great badge. I should have a badge, and having trained my dog not to bark when the doorbell rings, but evidently not.
And I'm going to go a little bit different because I would actually need a CLR because some of mine are related as far as sharing multiple standards within One Ed Tech and participation on W3C committees. So going to need a CLR for that so you can have those associations embedded.
Awesome. Thank you so much, panelists, for doing that. And for everybody joining, I do promise we are going to do our best to honor our title here and demystify all of this stuff with you this afternoon. But we're going to jump into our very first question is all about that. And before we get into the what of demystifying this stuff, we're going to start out with the why. And so for the registrar professionals who are seeing all of this shiny stuff pop up and you're wondering, why should I care? Carrie, we're going to start off with you. Why does this stuff matter? Why should people care?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you why I care. And I think it may actually be why a lot of people care. The internet and the web's not a very trustworthy place, right? We can make claims online. We can't tell if they are true or not. It's hard to prove our identities. It's hard to prove our claims. When we tell people we've graduated from a university or have these skills, somebody needs to make a phone call or check on them, right? There's no way to do it through the web. But there's a standard now that Marty sort of mentioned the group, right? The W3C verifiable credential standard. And this is something that can be used across the web to prove what we know, who we are, right? And being able to use this for our learning and employment credentials means that this proof, like this way to verify, or one way to verify what we do, what we have done, what we know, also could exist alongside our other credentials, right? Our government documents or other claims that are made online. And you're going to see too that in Europe, it's already happening, right? Today, they just made a big announcement that the European digital identity wallets are going to be using this standard. So people will be using verifiable credentials to log on to websites even. So you will want your credentials, degrees, and badges from your institutions to be part of that array of digital credentials. So I think that's one big reason why.
Absolutely. I think where I start to get really excited around a lot of the conversations we're having is in creating ways to verify a new range of credentials than we've ever really seen offered at scale before. And obviously, these new approaches to credentialing are helping learners to better understand and communicate their learning to audiences outside the institution, which is incredibly valuable for their employability. And frankly, the reason the majority of students enroll, the reason that so many students drop out or question the value of their education investment is employability and a lack of clear insight into the impact of an education on their employability. So the more capacity we can provide folks to understand the value of their learning and to communicate the value of their learning in ways that maybe make a little bit more sense to folks outside the formal academy, the better.
Mhm.
So I would add another layer. So we might all agree that learning is a timeless pursuit, but it's not equally recognized. And registrars are seeing different types of students coming in through the door, and I think their role has always been to make their students shine, trying to help them articulate, their learning experiences through credits. And so we now have new and powerful tools to help with that recognition across that learning spectrum. So the different phase of learners also call for a non-traditional way of ability to recognize this learning. And I think the toolbox that we're now making available and try to demystify today can really help with that.
Love just how we're already getting started with that. And I do want to remind all of our attendees, feel free to use the chat, feel free to use the Q&A. We'll definitely try and get to everybody's questions, and hopefully this all-star panel will be able to answer them. I love that right out of the gate, we're also going global, talking about things in the EU. We have panelists not just from the US, but Canada, Italy, and can see distance of our attendees. Lots of countries represented here, which just feels really special to us. For our next part, we're going to get a little strange in how we kind of go about this. And, I'm just going to invite everybody watching us to just remember in the 1990s and the early 90s when there'd be, the famous taste test commercials where people would wear a blindfold and, they'd have to tell which soft drink or which chip was better. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun for these panelists to just sort of engage in sort of imagining, one of these taste tests, if we're wearing a blindfold, to emulate one of these taste tests and comparing some of these things side by side. How, what are the distinctive flavors the registrar professionals can pay attention to in order to tell the difference between these things? And I think we're going to start out first with the difference between open badges and LERs. And Simone, we'll let you go first on this one. The difference between open badges and LERs. If I'm wearing a blindfold, maybe a blindfold would be not the right analogy here, but what's the distinctive flavor to help tell these things apart?
All right, so they are two distinct things, but they share similarities. I guess LER would be a conceptual and inclusive, framing of learning and employment records, whereas open badges are one type of the technical standards that enable us to recognize learning and employment across a learning journey. To your point, Noah, trying to build on the food analogy, more than blind tasting, I would like to think of pairing. Okay, so in a sense, open badges, would be more fit to be paired with skills-based recognition, typically a single assertion of learning. So I guess open badges go very well with this whole new notion of skills-based learning. Back to you.
Awesome. Carrie, do you want to jump in before we go on to our next comparison there?
Yeah, I'm going to, I think that's great, and also I'm going to add some things to it. And instead of the drink analogy in the 90s, I'm going to use the email analogy and say that email is the type of way we all communicate online, right? But somebody says, use my Gmail, use my Yahoo, use my AOL, right? Because it's the 90s. And we all kind of know what that means. We all know their email, but we also know that they are different types of email. So an LER is something like that, right? An LER is a single record or it's a collection of records. And open badges are single, like they are single records, right? They are intended to be one recognition of achievement at a time. And they can contain a lot of skill data, just as the CLRs can. But the open badges are really intended to be one achievement at a time, right? And they're digitally signed, and they're an open badges 3.0, and they're considered a type of LER. And one more thing about LER, I have to say. So we're all talking about LER, and some people are like, I don't know what that means. Like, what is LER? And some people say LER if they're trying to be funny, like me. You know what LER comes from? Not everybody knows this, but in 2020, the T3 Innovation Network created a specification, and they called it the LER wrapper. And what it was intended to do was to take education credentials and wrap it inside of this new thing called verifiable credentials, right? And so it was a way to say, I have a badge, I'm going to make it a verifiable credential. And we started calling those LERs. But then what happened was, as we've evolved over time, things like open badges and CLRs have become their own type of verifiable credentials. And so we don't need to have that wrapper anymore, but we still call them LERs. And so it carries on, but it's causing some confusion. So I just thought maybe knowing the history might help some folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that one, Carrie, and especially taking me back to the 90s and yelling, Mom, why'd you pick up the phone? I was checking my email. For our next taste test, Marty, we're going to kick to you, Marty, for what is the distinction between CLRs and LERs? Marty, sorry, I'm going to go 2020 on you and let you know you're muted. I apologize.
I was so close to getting it on my own. I was so close, Noah. Then you crushed my hopes and dreams. All right. So, what a CLR, a badge is a single assertion. A CLR can contain a single assertion, but it's really designed to have multiple assertions. So the easiest way I can describe like the usage of a CLR. So an LER is one or many CLRs, one or many badges, CLRs and badges, so on and so forth. But a CLR is a very specific thing because, for example, in the education space with teachers. So a teacher license has these things on it called endorsements. And endorsements relate to a specific course code in a state. So I have an endorsement that I can teach 3 through 8 math. I have an endorsement that I can teach US history. And so a school needs to know that the teacher is endorsed for that specific content area. So I need to know a couple of things about that teacher. I need to know that they have a valid license, and I need to know that they have the endorsement for the class. And if they're teaching multiple classes, I need to know that they have all those endorsements. So if you're teaching reading, and then you're teaching just general English, AP English, for example, you have to have endorsements for each one of those, and they have to be associated with that license. So it's really just a kind of structured way to communicate all of that in one object. And so those relationships are really important because you can then say, this is a child of, or this is a parent of. And so licensing is one example. Transcripts, obviously, another example. Most courses have relationships to other courses. And so, again, kind of that same license use case where an individual is getting a license, well, the licensure specialist has to evaluate that transcript visually and then specify what that potential educators should be endorsed for. So that takes a lot of human power. So if you can use a CLR and you get that directly from one system to another system and it's verifiable, that reduces the human effort. And anytime we can reduce human effort, we also reduce human error. And then you increase throughput.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Marty. And Gina, thank you so much for asking the question. It looks like a lot of people are going to jump in and help you out in the chat there. But and please, thank you for any viewers who keep us accountable on the lingo and acronyms: CLR, Comprehensive Learner Record; LER, Learning and Employment Records. Please do ask questions if we neglect to spell things out. And would be remiss not to mention that AACRAO does have Registrars, a report on the website. It's a little dated now from I believe early 2021 on the CLR. And there's a new report that will be coming out soon, as well as an update to the website, hopefully before the end of 2023. So do know that that's coming. And we had debated with the panelists whether we were going to touch on the difference between LERs, learning employment records, and wallets. And we did decide we'd go ahead and do it, especially because just at the Convergence conference last week, we did hear registrars talking about it. It is something that's going to start kind of in procurement discussions. And we decided it's probably important for us to make sure that, you know, our registrar professionals know enough to be dangerous when they're assisting our colleagues around campus on these, you know, possible procurements, and being able to just do the taste test. What is the difference between an LER and a wallet? And I don't know if Marty, you want to just keep going, and then Carrie can jump in.
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in. And it's really, so learning implement record is kind of the digital, you know, this digital set of records. And then a wallet is just like this, just like the thing in your pocket. You put stuff in it, you take stuff out of it, you use it, and then you put stuff back in it. So that's what a wallet is. It's exactly like this. And sometimes you can put new things in it. Sometimes things expire in your wallet and you have to go get a new one, you know, a new credit card, you have to get a new license, all these things. Now, hopefully, this has not been proven out that digital wallets can automatically do some of that stuff. But it's just this. It's pick something out that has value, exchange it with someone, and then potentially put it back. LERs are just the term of art that represents a credit card or a license or a stack of dollar bills. Carrie?
Absolutely. That is exactly what wallets are. And I'll add to this that they can be a little bit more in this context. So the reason we talk about digital credentials and all of these standards is that they have metadata properties, right? And vocabularies and things that machines and people can read and understand. And because the reason we want to use these specific like vocabularies, right, is so that applications like wallets can understand them. So wallets know how to display them, they know how to verify them, but also wallets could be used to like be cool apps. Like maybe they can help people find a job right from in the wallet, or they can do like internship matching. Like, so in the future, what I think is that we won't just talk about wallets. We're going to talk about applications that understand LERs, and wallets are just like the first phase of that.
Thank you so much for these great analogies. The chat is just blowing up. Everybody seems to really appreciate it. I think for registrar professionals, these answers are just really helpful, especially for some folks who are used to getting things to talk to each other, like the student information system and degree audit, for example. So I think this is really great. And we did promise in our description that we would not just talk about what these things are, but what they aren't. And so we thought with the panelists that a fun question might be to ask, what is a common myth or misconception about this stuff that you believe it's important for registrars to properly understand? And Simone, we're going to start with you. What is a myth or misconception that you want to debunk today?
Okay, so most of the stuff that we talk about with comprehensive learner records and open badges are brand names for digital credentials. So the things that you use, digital things that we use to recognize learning. I want to demystify sort of the relationship between, say, micro credentials and digital credentials a little bit. And I'm just going to bring in, I think, a very a streetwise definition from AACRAO, in fact. And so think of so a diploma is to a degree what a badge is to a micro credential. So digital credentials are different than micro credential because they are just the token that you receive at the end of a learning experience to represent that. Whereas micro credentials, in its more holistic sense, is everything that goes into designing, delivering, assessing, and credentialing a shorter type of learning experience. So when we are talking about digital credentials today, but we know that the emergent question is micro credentials, and there is some confusion and conflation in the market. So I wanted to kind of take us back to AACRAO's own definition for micro credentials that relates it to digital credentials, and I think it's very useful.
Love it. Amr, can we get you to go next with a myth or misconception?
Yeah, I think almost echoing Simone, one myth I think is that these innovative approaches to recognizing and awarding learning are new. Many institutions have continuing ed divisions that have been offering credit for prior learning, supporting competency-based pathways to credential attainment, and awarding micro-credentials for decades. I think the other is that they're inherently or are typically low quality. For most employment-focused credentials, the standard for achievement is actually immensely high, as the student's expectation is that they're going to be able to leverage that credential for work shortly after earning the credential, which is a much higher standard than I think many of our post-secondary credentials have applied to them. And since many of these offerings tend not to be financial aid eligible, that the student's expectation around return on investment becomes very, very significant. So I think those are kind of the two misconceptions that we tend to bump into very frequently. One is that this is a very brand new thing. I think what's new is the array of technologies and services that exist to formalize or to collect those materials into single places. And the other is that they're poor quality, which is I think just not reflective of the reality.
And I can build upon that too, if you don't mind, Noah. I think that folks also, there's a misconception of the word badge in this space. And a badge, in open badges, when we first started creating them, like almost 15 years ago now, it was about being able to recognize anything, right? And the word badge really was kind of a misnomer. People were thinking of it as like some kind of minimized, not important skill attainment, what have you, right? Sorry, my dog is barking, so I'm a little bit distracted. So open badges couldn't always recognize anything, but typically we did more types of micro credentials with them up until recently, because in open badges 3.0 we have a different type of technology for open badges. So previously open badges have been hosted on websites, but now they can be digitally signed, which means that they're very appropriately usable for degrees, which is something the DCC is working on, which is helping our member institutions issue their degrees as open badges. Certainly not badges, right? But they are open badges still. And one other thing I'm going to throw in here, because this comes up a lot too, totally unrelated to what I just said. No blockchain. There's no blockchain involved in any of this. You can completely forget about blockchain in these conversations if you want. If you don't want to, you could include it. It's not necessary.
Marty, do you share a myth or misconception as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that that could be the entire content of this discussion. I think one misconception is, why don't my systems already do this? I can already export files from my issuing system. Like I can print a PDF. I print PDFs for people all the time and send them, Parchment does this. They print PDFs for folks, you go pay and then print a PDF, and that PDF is really a physical verifiable credential. So, don't I already do this? And the answer is no. So because even with those PDFs, and even legislatively in some cases, a human has to inspect that PDF, make sure it's not tampered with, make sure that nobody's changed it. I had a great conversation with an unnamed individual that said, oh yeah, we get transcripts that have, they took physical whiteout and rescanned the PDF, or they used the wrong font on the PDF to change their grade. And then, we have to inspect that. So this whole concept of verifiable credential, the tamper evidence piece of that is hugely valuable, because what tampered evidence means is you change anything about the file itself. You change an A to a lowercase a, uppercase to lowercase a. That breaks the verifiable credential. So it's really, really important to understand, like, this is the next generation of where we're at today, and it's necessary, again, to the points I made earlier. less human interaction, less human error, less potential for fraud. Lots of really cool value propositions.
Love it. Love it. I think that definitely speaks true to the registrar heart right there, Marty. And I think it's also a really good transition to the next question. And we're going to go to you, Amr, for this one. And as we consider what learning mobility means for learners engaging in higher ed, and that could be incoming high school graduates, international students, transfer students, lifelong learners, professional studies, re-engaging, the gamut, to describe a realistic use case of one of these learner populations and their digital learning records that touches the office of the registrar.
Well, yeah, I don't have to dig that deep, fortunately or unfortunately here. This is my mom. So my mom, my family immigrated to Canada in the 1984. My mom had her bachelor's of chemistry. She earned a bachelor's of chemistry. She at the University of at that time University of Bombay. She worked for British Airways as a flight attendant for 2 years after earning her bachelor's degree in chemistry. Was credentialed in an array of sort of medical and financial training. She came to Canada. She went to the Employment Canada office, said, I have my bachelor's in chemistry. I love math. This is what I've been doing for the last 2 years. They're like, oh, cool. You're a stewardess. You could probably be a waitress. And that was kind of the end of that engagement. So recognition of foreign credentials is something that really affects my family story, because what she did was tell the agent what she thought of his depth of expertise and work, left, enrolled at the local community college in Ottawa, Algonquin College, if we have any Canadians on the call, got her credential in accountancy, and then sort of proceeded on a journey, a 30-year journey of lifelong learning, where she joined the federal public service. She climbed the ladder in Canada's version of the IRS. And that, that's her career story, is really one where it's bringing multiple pieces of learning together to form something greater than the sum of its parts. But every time she re-engaged or re-enrolled in a different learning experience, it was a massive amount of paperwork to try to get all that material then recognized by the institution, so that she could move forward into whatever program it was made sense for her based on the prerequisites of that program. So having some capacity to make learning more mobile for her would have made her life easier. Now, she was driven, she wanted to do it anyway, and she had the resources to make it all come together, so it was fine. But when we look at the state of the state right now, we have 39 million, 40 million some Americans who have some college experience but no degree. We know that there's many more individuals who have an array of different and random learning experiences that aren't really recognized in any formal way. And if they had the capacity to pursue education in a more agile way, where they had ownership of their own learning records in a way that translated from institution to institution in a way that made sense, it'd be less likely that they'd have a fresh start every time those individuals wanted to return to the academy to pursue a learning outcome that would help them achieve a personal goal. So again, it's a bit of a personal story, but just to give you a sense of where learning mobility becomes a very sort of significant topic of focus and concern.
Thank you for that. And it just makes it so real for us, Amr. So thank you so much for sharing. Marty, you said you wanted to jump in on this one and possibly share your screen. Hopefully you have
I just want to pop this up real quick because I think it's pretty representative. So you can see my screen there of all those pieces of paper, right? And what this is a teacher's wallet. So every 5 years, this person has to go find all these documents, and you can see the notes that are made there. Paper application that was lost for 6 months. And so this, is a real world use case, because every time and this person is licensed in 5 different states. For each one of those, she has to dig all this back up, resubmit this stack of paper with new stuff. So this stack only grows. And so if you have an LER, because this is an LER, this is a lot of things that are related by the person, but they're not necessarily related to each other. but they're all credentials and they're all valid individually. And some of them are related. But this is what we're solving is that's when we show this to teachers, they go, I'm really scared that I don't know where any of that is. And I have to find it every 5 years. So anyway, I thought visual representation, picture's worth 1,000 words, and I just love that one.
Do you know, as somebody who right now is probably going to have his teacher's license lapse because I don't know where that stuff is, and that definitely hits home for me. Savode?
Yeah, right. I would encourage everyone on the call to just think for a moment where their diplomas is. No, just wanted to sort of layer onto this framing of learner mobility, which is continued in the concept of worker mobility. So we continue to learn across this journey. Digital credentials, I would think, add agility to the learning and into the ability to really just move around our stages in life and being recognized for what we have achieved during the experience that we have made over a lifetime. So being able to take those verifiable claims with us, so this idea of portability, which is very much key, particularly in supporting international student mobility, makes our ability to create our own pathways across multiple learning experiences more agile. And this is clearly one of the very important value out of digital credentials.
I just love how all of our panelists are just making it so clear that these learning mobility is enabling learning records that have always been about us to also be things that are for us. That you're all describing use cases where these aren't just things that we pass around, but actually, as the owners of them, we are looking at our own learning records. I think that's a fundamental, sort of shift in the way things are done that I really appreciate how you all are making, so clear to our audience this afternoon. Going to our next question, we're going to start with you on this one. That is, what is an essential question that registrar professionals can be campus leaders in asking around campus?
So it's an interesting topic. I think the first question that comes to mind for me is, what are we currently doing in alternative credentialing? I think what you'll find is that there's multiple departments across the institution that are offering non-degree credentials of one type or another with very little connective tissue. And in some cases, completely discounting what I said earlier, with minimal thought to quality or outcome. In some cases, the non-degree credentials that are being offered are being offered because a faculty member had an idea, and the dean didn't want to argue with them, which is, fine, fair enough, but maybe let's not put the seal of the university on it. So I think that's really, I think, that the starting point. A lot of these offerings have kind of popped up sporadically. In many cases, there isn't an institution-wide taxonomy or a shared understanding of what different words mean when it relates to non-degree credentials. So, what is a certificate in the context of Compass Point University? What is a badge in the context of Compass Point? What does a diploma mean? What is a stackable credential? What is a competency in our institution's vernacular? Like, having a clear sense of what these terms mean and what these things are and what's actually required to achieve them can create a level of institution-wide symmetry that minimizes confusion on the part of employers and also makes life a little bit easier for students in understanding and navigating through the array of options that might be available on the website or in the catalog. So I think the first question, if I was a registrar professional, that I would ask is, what are we doing? And then the follow-up questions will present themselves as a wider and wider picture emerges of what's going on.
Carrie, do you want to jump in next?
Yeah, sorry. I was going to jump in there. I'm going to just build also upon what Amrit was saying. I think about verifiable credentials like you do any other digitally signed documents. Many of us have done this already. We've had used DocuSign, we've had signed PDFs. Verifiable credentials are the same thing. They're just standardized in a way so that people do them in the same way, right? Ideally, DocuSign and Adobe and all of them start adapting verifiable credentials method too. With that in mind, with your familiarity of where digital signatures could be used in your environment, consider where you could add that to the work that your offices do, right? Is there something that you could use this for that would make your jobs easier, right? Is this a layer you could add on top of something that would add value to your students? So start evaluating your systems now and consider what could we do here that could be more digital and be digitally signed that would help everybody, right? So something to just sort of evaluate, like Amrit said, look around and see what you're doing, but maybe start in your office now and think about that.
That's awesome. And panelists, does anybody else want to jump in on this one before we go to the next question? All right. Well, our next question is, what's something that keeps you up at night the registrar professionals should be aware of? What could go wrong, and what are the risk factors and possible consequences? And Marty, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, so there's one thing is we, a number of years ago, we started saying digital native, right? These kids that are growing up are digital natives. And now they're mobile first digital natives. And there's a lot of tools that, you as a registrar, like your customers are mobile first. They're digital natives. They're expecting things to move at the speed of mobile, right? And so the current architectures out there not leaning into that. And so at some point, the customer is going to ask, why do I not have this? The customer is going to say, why am I still getting a document that I have to carry over here and do this with? So I just think about the speed of technology and the speed of the consumer and what their expectations are. To be the pathetic capitalist is customer retention, like features and functionality. Like you think about your banking app, you think about Starbucks app. How easy is it to pay with a Starbucks app now? You think about getting on a plane, scanning that it's an expectation of your customer. Now, will you lose that customer because you don't have that? Probably not, but it's a consideration. So that's one thing that I think about, and it may not resonate here, but I've seen it time and time again in other industries where technologically folks can fall behind, and then they're struggling and chasing to catch up, and usually they have to pay a premium for that.
Love it. And thanks for all the questions coming in the chat. We'll definitely try and get to some of these. I know that our panelists have been answering them in the chat. And for those of you using the Q&A session, we appreciate our attendees who've been jumping in to share your own genius and your responses there. Our next question is, if you could pick one message and one senior campus leader to hear that message from the Office of the Registrar, what would that message be and who would hear it? And Simone, we'll start with you on this one.
All right, so I imagine the registrar asking, say, an admission officer, the following question: if we issued it, will you recognize it? And let me explain that. There is a race towards being able to issue credentials with the latest emerging technology, especially once we've crossed the chiasm that we want to leverage digital technologies because they make things more efficient. And so if you talk to the registrar, they're certainly interested in experimenting and issuing badges and certificates and CLRs and so on. But will that same institution recognize those kind of credentials if they come in attached to an application? To the point that I would argue that you can only issue CLRs if you recognize them in admission. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in a skewed situation where we are injecting all these new types of credentials in the ecosystem, and then we still have the problem for them being recognized, which is the challenge right now. It's a recognition of them. And sometimes we conflate the type of digital credentials that we use, say open badges, with the quality, or with a sense that the technology that we use is prescriptive in respect to it is quality assured or recognized. These credentials do a great job at adding portability to our experiences, making them verifiable, and so on. But to make sense of them, we have to go beyond the definition of it and just look inside. And the machine readability and the standards that we work hard to draft and to get adopted do exactly that. So they give you another layer of sense making, both for humans in terms of transparency and comparability, but also for a machine that can make the process more efficient. So again, I would say that maybe as a rule of thumb, like as an institution, if you're issuing open badges, your admission officer should be able to recognize them without asking a question if they come in through an application.
Wow, love it. Yeah, if we're going to be creating and issuing these, we should also be participating in the ecosystem of recognizing them as well. Love it. Amr, do you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I think what excites me about this conversation in general is signaling a shift in the role of the registrar from being an operational or functional role on campus to really more of a strategic driver of the credentialing strategy of the institution. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding campus-wide around the role that registrars play. From our publication, what we hear a lot of is like the Office of No. And I think it speaks to how misunderstood the role of the registrar really is and the work that the registrar is trying to do. I've heard it described as a difference between an ethics of empathy versus an ethics of justice, which is the idea of around, is the role to apply the rules in equal fashion across all individuals that the institution addresses, or is the role to try to help folks navigate the barriers that might be in their way, depending on who they are and what they're trying to deal with. And I think that it presents a very interesting opportunity for the registrar of the future to start creating a very different mentality institution-wide around what a credential is, what the institution does, who the institution serves, and the variety of ways the institution can serve that individual. So that's what starts to get me really excited when I think about this discussion. And I realize I'm not answering the formal question asked here, but I think that's, the message is the registrar is a strategic driver of credentialing at the institution, of defining the institution's presence around its credential offerings. And the one senior person who should be listening to it is anyone.
That makes a lot of sense. You know what, I'm going to speak to more of the functionality of implementing this, because I think it sounds like, oh my gosh, another thing I have to do in my job, right? And I want to speak to the IT department, the CIOs and the CTOs of your universities, and tell you that you should speak to your SISs, your student information systems, and ask them to integrate issuing credentials. It's not hard technology, and it will be like an easy button for the registrars. So that is it, registrars. Talk to your IT department and encourage them to encourage your vendors to start implementing this. They will. They just need to hear from you now, so they'll do it sooner.
Fantastic stuff. And I don't know if as Amr said there, we went a little off where the question was going. If anybody has of the panelists want to keep this conversation going in a tangential direction, otherwise we can start pulling some questions from the chat as well.
I mean, one of the things that I would tell them is, you know, have you heard of this guy Noah Geisel and Badge Summit? Because it might be useful for you to show up there.
Lovely. I was also reflecting on this sort of the shifting paradigm of registrars, and I'm not a registrar, but I do think that traditionally credentialing was looked at as the completion of an academic journey of your the learning part of your life. Now that we talk about lifelong learning journey, graduation becomes, it's not the end of the academic experience, is kind of a milestone in your lifelong learning journeys. And digital credentials could really help being that vector that encapsulate that academic part, that validates it, that makes it visible and portable, but also equip, you know, the person, the learner, with a wallet, let's say, or, you know, a place where they can continue to add these bits of recognition across their journey, even when they get into the workforce. In fact, and we have not talked about this here because that's sort of not the main focus, but you know, the rebalancing of learning and employment records as the conceptual framing of digital credential across learning and employment, I think it's much needed. Because in fact, we spend like in a time scale, more time, you know, employed, you know, across jobs, and maybe we pick up a lot of experience there than in the, you know, 4 years that we spent in the university. And we know that that's kind of not linear anymore. But so registrars are also shifting in the way they see themselves as kind of a moment, you know, in this lifelong learning journey, and being able to equip them with technology, equip the learners, the graduates with technology that will persist over their the journey.
I love this, the way this conversation is going. I'm guessing that there are very few registrar professionals who are watching who are upset by hearing that the one person who should be listening to the registrar is everybody. So thank you very much, Alfred. And we do have a question that I'm gonna in the chat that I'm gonna go to Carrie on, and Carrie, I'll drop a link for you unless somebody beats me to it with the LER ecosystem report that you put out that I think might be helpful in this. But Michael asks, can I hear more about the functionalities and benefits? And I think that the recent T3 report on with the LER ecosystem might be a way of helping to paint a picture for people of kind of the functionalities of learning records contributing to learning mobility and, you know, actually being used by you know, real world people.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was putting something in the chat to sort of building upon what Simone was talking about, because it was making me think about how people switch careers midlife. And like we all talk about learning at the beginning of life, but really we are learning throughout our lives, and we may, you know, switch gears at some point, and what we've done earlier in our lives could be very applicable to what we want to do later in any context, right? Yeah, so we released this report. The DCC helped to organize a group of organizations, right? We really were the facilitators of this work, and we just participated as one of the facilitators to think about what are the needs of the ecosystem. And so this is like an early look at who are participants in the ecosystem and what might they need. So you could look at this map and you could click through each of the stakeholders, and there are sort of sections that describe what they could need. And in some cases, I think this speaks to what funding is needed, what tools are needed from vendors, right? It's just sort of speaking to, hey, these are the parts of the ecosystem that need these things. And of course, there's overlap and all, but it's worth looking at and seeing where you land in there, right? You may land in several places. It's a good start to a map, I think, as a reference for all of us to take a look at.
Fantastic. Is there any other panelists who wants to jump in to share another features or benefits around this stuff, just the real world applications before we get to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in again, kind of from the state kind of licensure office. You know, the state capacity across all licensed professions is limited, right? So individuals doing this work by hand, issuing licenses, doing all that stuff. So anything you can do to reduce friction puts more teachers in the classroom, puts more nurses in the hospital, puts more doctors, puts more chiropractors to work. I mean, the licensed professions are broad reaching. And so anything you can do to reduce friction for those folks, get past the paperwork, but give them that official, issued from the system of record, that official stamp of approval that they can go out and gain a meaningful wage is hugely valuable. In any case, it doesn't matter, like, barbers, cosmetologists, like all of the licensed professions suffer from this. And so that's the main value proposition that we talk about when we're talking with our customers and with other folks in the space is, why do I care? What if I could automatically do that? What if there's no human? What if the automated license or the automated licensed professional is the most productive licensed professional you have in your office? It's pretty cool.
I love that example, and it speaks literally to the mobility of people thanks to their learning. Records being mobile. And the barber's a great example. I recently met a barber who said that during the pandemic, they moved from Florida to another state and they couldn't work for over 6 months because their license was not as mobile as they were. For anybody who did click on in the chat on the LER ecosystem link there and scroll down to the graphic that has the icons and sort of a circular clock-like face, they may have noticed that in the overlapping Venn diagram that at the very middle there is equity. And I think that for a lot of the folks that, in the registrar profession, serving all learners is a huge imperative for us. And, I'm just sort of wondering for the registrar professionals going, okay, I'm all ears. Like, how can, these be tools for equity? Amrit, do you have any thoughts about, how this all plays into equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really starts to remove some of the administrative hurdles and some of the cost hurdles that folks run into when trying to access a learning experience. We have a tendency to really think about education as being accessible. We all believe in education as a socioeconomic development engine. But I think when push comes to shove, when we look at the format of a degree program, when we look at the cost of a degree program, when we look at what's required of a student, when we look at having to create state policy, for example, that says owing money to the library is not a good enough reason to withhold access to a degree. Like, these kinds of things are massive shifts to try to create layers of equity, to recognize that folks have different starting points. So when I think about a lot of the work happening to create more learning mobility, more capacity for individuals to stop in and stop out of a learning experience without being punished for it, these activities start to make higher education a more equitable ecosystem for folks. It starts to make it more navigable for people who have significant out of institution priorities to manage. And it starts to create access again for folks to come back into the academy to maybe earn a credential or complete a credential where they might not have been able to do so before. So I think at a very, very high level, a lot of what we're talking about today, when put in place and implemented, starts to create a post-secondary ecosystem that's easier for learners to navigate who aren't necessarily the traditional learner that we're used to serving.
No, if I may, I think to follow up on the equity piece, I think we normally refer to our sector as sort of, I refer to it as the cred tech. So we know of educational technology, this is credentialing for education. But we possibly moving toward more, let me come up with a term here, empowerment tech. Especially when we think about recognition and these new tools that we have available make the invisible manifest. So the small co-curricular activities that have been corollary to the main degree can now be credentials or recognized. They can be stacked next to the formal journeys or degree pathways. And although the question is still open whether we should give credits to the smaller learning experiences or micro-credentials, I would like to see some research done, even outside of the credits, what are those additional learning experiences that are more micro, do they contribute to better outcomes in a degree pathways? And I think they do. Otherwise, why would, say, institutions already invest in them? Sort of the student life is made of different experiences that should support those outcomes, completion. And so could we measure, what is the marginal additional utility of like those, micro credentials to a full degree? And so if those outcomes are better, I think we don't have to concern ourselves with necessarily just calculating how many credits, do I need to recognize for a micro credential, for example. It's an empowerment. I think it's just really giving, if you want to send off your students into the world, you can equip them with just more sort of empowerment about what they've already accomplished.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, so real quickly is as people start developing more and more of these credentials, the data will become richer. Right? You'll become more and more familiar with the skill descriptors and the languages being used, and we will see a lot of a lot of usage for this, right? It's going to steamroll in that way. And it's great that the technology, the verifiable credentials technology, is built upon equity. Like, this is what it's about, having control and access to that data that's about you. So pretty soon you'll have rich data, you'll have control over privacy and use it in all sorts of ways online. So yeah, it's embedded in all of this, I believe.
I am just so thrilled with how this has gone, and I hope that our attendees have enjoyed it even half as much as I have. For folks who don't already know these people, again, their full bios are linked on the webpage for this. Amrit mentioned the publication. He runs Evolution with 3 Ls. Highly recommend you check it out. Marty Reed, he gave you a graphic there. I bet he would want you to check out the teacher wallet that he has. Terry is head of the Digital Credentials Consortium out of MIT. Simone, you can catch him really all over the world, but coming up here in a few weeks, a really great place to meet him will be at the EPIC conference in Vienna, Austria. He may even find a way to get you a drink or something. But quick round robin in our final 90 seconds, panelists, if you just want to give our attendees a quick how they can follow up and connect with you.
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily, so just look up my name there. And also, we have a new Digital Credential Consortium has a new LinkedIn page. We'd love it if you'd follow us, because we're going to start posting to there more. And we hope we can help with these conversations there too.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's the easiest way to connect with me personally. And then as Noah said, you can subscribe to our publication at evolutionwith3ls.com/subscribe.
Same for me. It's LinkedIn. Any interesting things that I'm thinking about or doing in space, it all comes up there. So
awesome. And I don't know if any of these people are still on the platform formerly known as Twitter, but they do have some pretty good handles on there. Simone, I just had to cut in since you're at Psycho Reactor on Twitter there. But do you want to give them a better place than that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a place. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for taking the time. Attendees, thank you so much for being with us, and have a badge-worthy rest of your day. And we hope to connect with you soon. And one of the places to connect with us is on the AACRAO Exchange for the digital credentials community. It is free to join. Please do join us there. Keep the conversation going, and have a great rest of your day.
And thank you, friends. See you later.